Hi, everyone. Welcome, welcome. I'm just trying to queue up Jerry's video. Let me see. Fantastic. There we are. We're here.
Right.
We're there. Hi, everybody. Oh, fantastic. Well, I would like to start this webinar off by welcoming everybody. This is our it is our first mentor webinar that is cross Canada. So I'm absolutely thrilled to have representatives here today from British Columbia, Alberta, Toronto, and Montreal. So welcome to everybody. Thank you so much for coming. My name is Allison Moore. I'm the artsvest program manager in Alberta, and Jerry Smith, our mentor, is actually in the Toronto office right now, all set up. So for the webinar today, because Jerry's hosting from Toronto, I'd like to start with a land acknowledgement. And so we would like to, and this land acknowledgement is specifically regarding where Jerry is in Toronto. So we'd like to acknowledge the land we're meeting on is the traditional territory of many nations, including the Mississaugas of the Credit, the Anishinaabe, the Chippewa, the Haudenosaunee, and the Wendat peoples, and is now home to the many diverse First Nations, Inuit, and Métis peoples. We also acknowledge that Toronto is covered by Treaty 13 with the Mississaugas of the Credit. Fantastic. Okay, so for our webinar today, the topic is, what should we expect as we pursue sponsorships, common sponsorship challenges, and encouraging solutions? So before we're getting started, I think everyone can view it on their screen. We've set up a little bit of a poll, and the poll has been to be able to gather some information so that it helps Jerry to know who's in the room today. There's 112 of you from across Canada, and it's super helpful for us to have you answer the poll quickly just so that he can speak more directly to your organizations. So as I do the introduction, please continue filling out the polls. Great. So this webinar provides a high-level look at the entire sponsorship cycle, focusing on sponsorship challenges that are common to organizations seeking sponsorship at every step in the sponsorship cycle. It will highlight practical solutions and approaches to help your organization secure and maintain partnerships. So the way we're going to host the webinar is that Jerry is going to be answering questions from the Q&A after the webinar. So I'll be the one queuing the questions and he'll be answering them. So if you have any questions throughout the webinar, please type them into the Q&A and not into the chat window. A couple people are saying they can't see the poll. God, I'm so sorry. It should be in the middle of your screen. If it's not popping up, there must be something blocking it. And we'll look into that for our next poll because this is a first time situation here. So just as a heads up to you guys, there is a handout and slides for this presentation. So what I'll be doing is everyone who's registered to attend, I'll get your email addresses and I'll send out a follow-up email, which will have a copy of the handout and the slides for reference for later. And then just another heads up, I know some people like to call on via phone. It's really hard for me to look up who you are after. So if you are calling in via phone, if you can send me an email after to let me know, or your program manager to let them know that you were in attendance, that's super helpful just from our attendance standpoint. Fantastic. So Jerry Smith is currently the GM at First Stage, and for 30 years, Jerry was active inside Humber College and beyond as an educator, leader, and trainer. Jerry actually established the professional theater training program at Humber College, where he managed for close to a decade, as well as the college's post-diploma certificate programs, full-time and part-time, in arts administration and cultural management, which he coordinated. His experience includes a really wide range of work on different boards, from past president of Theatre Ontario, the Association of Cultural Executives, and the Canadian Association of Arts Administration Educators, as well as the chairmanship of South Etobicoke Cultural Plan, presidency of the Lakeshore Arts, chairman of the Greater Toronto Philharmonic Orchestra, vice president for Community Arts Ontario, chairman of the advisory committee for Assembly Hall, and was selected as Volunteer of the Year Cultural Champion for Toronto. Currently, Jerry's also the past president of Arts Consultants Canada and a member of Arts Vote Toronto and Arts a Day at City Hall campaigns. Oh my goodness, Jerry. And so as a freelance consultant, Jerry has also carried out feasibility studies and program reviews for the Ministry of Citizenship and Culture, the OAC, former cities of York and Etobicoke Metro, the Living Arts Center in Mississauga, the Imperial Oil Center of Performing Arts in Sarnia, Arbor Theatre in Peterborough, Brampton Arts Council, the City of Brampton, Regent Theatre Picton, the Grey Highlands Public Library, and the City of Barrie. And he facilitates numerous community and public consultations in a series of workshops in different areas of board development, leadership, strategic planning, marketing, fundraising, and sponsorship. And we're so lucky to have you as a mentor, Jerry.
Hooray!
Oh, thank you so much. Jerry, do you want me to read the results of the poll?
If you would, just to give me a quick overview.
Okay, great. So everybody, I'm just gonna close the poll. I'm sorry if you missed out, but it's all good. Oh, I can share the results. How exciting is that? Okay, so I think you guys can see these results. So it's asking, what region of Canada are you based in? 15% is British Columbia, 62% is Alberta, 21% is Toronto, and 3 people are here from Montreal, which is fantastic. Is your organization based in a small town or a large city? 13% small town, 72% large city, 15% in between. I knew I needed to add the in between. And which arts practice does your group mostly involve itself in? 56% is performing arts, 18% is visual arts, 10% is multidisciplinary, 17% is community arts, and 17% is other. In your community, is your organization seen as small? 59% said small. Medium, 39% said medium. Large, 8% said large. And then what is your sponsorship role in the organization? 65% of the people today are staff members, 35% are board members, and 6% are committee members. And who's involved in developing and delivering your sponsorship activities? 16% board or staff only, 15% board committee only, and 71% it's a combination of the staff and board. And then where is your organization in terms of your evolution? So 22% are novices, they're just starting. 35% have been through the sponsorship cycle once before. 22% feel like they're in a groove, they've got multiple sponsors, and 25% feel like they're in a rut, same old, same old. You guys, thank you so much. We had 100 people complete our poll, which is really fantastic. It's so wonderful to know more about everybody that's in the room today. So I am now going to officially pass it off to Jerry.
Excellent, and I think I'm going to have to stop sharing there. And I've got that pop-up menu on my screen, whereas I can't get, oh, okay, one more. Okay, evolution, not revolution. Good morning, good day, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. I must tell Allison the next time we'll use a shorter version of that biography. As she went through it, I'm sure your brain was saying one of 3 things. Either he has a wealth of experience, secondly, he couldn't hold down a steady job, or 3, he must be old. I think I would be comfortable with any one of those answers. Let's go on to the next slide. And the next slide. Okay, very, very quickly, folks. Today is about reasonable expectations, going someplace where you've never really been before, or if you have, you've only been a tourist and a visitor, whereas you need to get to a point of being much more comfortable with that. So quickly, our overall agenda for the today is two parts. In the first part, I'd like to talk a little bit about what sponsorship is, why sponsorship is important and valuable, who the players and the teams are in this process, where should we be targeting our sponsorship, and finally, how the sponsorship cycle. And that sponsorship cycle is going to be the second half of our presentation. So, Allison, if we could take a look at the next slide. Everything that I'm going to tell you today is gospel truth, except for the following. One, no one size fits all. There is no single right answer here. One of the things that you're going to become more comfortable with as a concept, as an idea, is that relationship building, and that's what this is really all about, is fluid, dynamic, and evolving. Doesn't matter what kind of relationship you're talking about, fluid, dynamic, and evolving, I think would be a good way to characterize. What it really means is that as you're listening today, you're going to have to remember that I've got to be nimble. I've got to be responsive to what it is that the potential sponsor is looking for. It's one of those things where size does matter. The scale of your operation, the proximity of your organization to potential sponsors, the ownership structure of those sponsors, whether they're entrepreneurial, owner-managed, or they're branches or parts of larger corporations. These are relevant things that we need to pay attention to. And one of the things as a theme, you want to learn how to become strategic versus tactical, or metaphorically, you got to remember the dance and not just the steps. I don't know if you've ever had that experience of learning a second language, but it's kind of like, yes, you get a word here and there, then a phrase, then you can put together simple sentences. And then as you progress down that highway, you get to a point that you begin to articulate in a responsive and an interactive fashion. So what we really want to do is to be strategic, and remember who you are. It's going to be important. For example, for those of you who may be, for example, working with kids, theater company, dance company, gallery, heritage site, etc., then if your target market is children, then you're probably not going to go and knock on the door of breweries and distilleries, because that's really not who you are. So let's take a look at the what, the next slide. The best way that I find to understand what sponsorship is a mutually beneficial partnership between a business and a not-for-profit and or a charity. For those of you who have some responsibility on the budgeting and bookkeeping side of it, you realize that the difference between a not-for-profit and a charity is significant, and as the accountants tell us, it's material. But for the most part, I'm going to pretend today that you already understand the implications of that for you. So mutual. When you're talking about sponsorship, you're not asking for a donation. You're not asking for a charitable contribution. It's a business deal. That's what sponsorship is all about. One of the things my mother used to say to me quite frequently is, the good Lord gave me 2 ears and 1 mouth for a reason, and that is that I should listen twice as much as I talk. Mom, God bless her, I did follow that many times, but not always. What that really means is you're in the middle of a conversation with a potential sponsor, and you start hearing them say things, oh, yeah, I'd be willing to give such and such, or do you guys do charitable receipts, or et cetera, et cetera. Pardon me, I apologize for having a cold today. What your brain has got to say is, hang on a minute. if this individual is an incorporated sole proprietor or partnership or incorporated, then I got to make sure that they understand, for example, that this is an expense. This is an investment by them. If a sponsor gives you a $500 sponsorship because they're trying to achieve marketing goals, then that individual is going to take that full $500 sponsorship and deduct it from his cost of doing business to lower his accountability or responsibility for taxes. If in fact the potential sponsor is thinking that all he's going to get out of this is a charitable receipt, then you need to help them understand that the $500 sponsorship as a business investment is fully expensable, $500, as opposed to if you give them a tax receipt, if you are a registered charity, worth $500, and they use that against their corporate or personal income, it's not $500. As you know, donations are only a portion of. So remember, it's a mutually beneficial, it's an investment, it's not an expense, and it's rooted in marketing, advertising, publicity, public relations, all of those business practices that they very well understand. Just a little insight here as well. When you're talking about sponsorship, there are three kinds of transactions. There's in-kind, there's expertise, and there's cash. Now, most of us, when we go and knock on that door because somebody has introduced us to a potential sponsor, what we're really looking for is cash. So it's a $200, it's a $500, it's a $5,000. Let's dream for those in the big cities. It's a $50,000. That's not a dream. That's a fancy. Then we also have to remind ourselves that a penny not spent out of your budget is as good as a penny earned. For example, recently worked with a visual arts center located in Toronto, and I advised them off to their insurance broker, and in effect, the insurance broker has determined that yes, his in-kind is important, as important to this company, this organization, as any cash donation. Although, again, as you begin to learn, become fluent in this language called sponsorship, then even though it may be an in-kind, you're still going to do a paper trail, an exchange of checks, because one of the things that you will begin to learn as you work your way through the artsvest program is that a cash contribution is valued at 100%, whereas in-kind contributions are not. Hey, in-kind are important, but let's just keep that in the back of our mind. So that's what sponsorship is. Let's take a look at the next slide. Again, when I take a look at the profile for the participants today, 59% of you consider yourself small, 39%, so that's 60-40, and 8% large. So for the most part, you're small and mid-sized arts organizations. So small is beautiful, local is better. What do I mean? Well, when you're talking about small and mid-sized businesses, they're more like us. We see ourselves as entrepreneurial, risk-taking in the arts. We know our audiences. We're close to them. We're mission-driven. We're value-driven, yet we're responsible. And yet, if I show that list of 3 characteristics to any entrepreneur, he'll say, that's not you, that's me. Even though we're not-for-profit, possibly a charity organization in our marketplace, in our community, we're actually more like small and mid-sized businesses because the decision maker is accessible in that small mid-sized business. The decision can be made much more quickly. I mean, the difference about going to a local business as opposed to a regional or a provincial or even a national, hey, every one of us defaults thinks, oh God, we're into sponsorship. Quick, let's go to our bank and ask them for a big hunk of money because they got lots of it. The way your local branch will regard you will be different than the way the area, district, region, province, or national takes a look at it. But again, decisions can be made much more quickly with small and mid-sized organizations and businesses. It's not based on a formula. It's based on, you tell them the story, you tell them how you think you can help them, and they'll say, I think that will work. Also, small and mid-sized businesses like you identify with your community, with your local market. And in effect, with sponsorship, in terms of life cycle, it's a little bit younger, a little bit newer, and so therefore there's slightly less competition. So small is beautiful, local is better. What we're really in the business about is delivering promises. Allison, can we look at the next slide? When you're having that conversation with the small, mid-sized business, and you're talking about mutual benefit for both sides, what you need to recognize is what they're looking for is the fact that the marketing goldmine is what sponsorship is all about. What we can do in burnishing, in polishing, in shining their image in their marketplace is what they will find attractive. Secondly, sponsorship allows you to be very specific, to be very targeted. Rifle, not shotgun, to use a metaphor that one of these days I'm going to have to stop using. And it's more of a tailored access. A couple of times before this presentation is finished today, I'll be coming back to a couple of themes. And one of those is this thing about flexibility, about being responsive to what they're looking for. So what we do have to offer them is we're in the business of imagination, of creativity. So 2 ears, 1 mouth, listen carefully to what it is that they're saying, and we have the imagination, we have the resources to respond to that. Because we know from experience, we can demonstrate that the impact of mutually beneficial business arrangements, i.e. sponsorship, is important. So to summarize, healthier communities are good for business. Allison, next slide, please. Again, quickly, why are we going down the sponsorship road? It's because a combination of reasons. One, support and from grants, foundations and governments, earned revenue from sales and membership and whatever, even donations. It's a highly fragmented, highly competitive marketplace. Increasingly, because of our success over the last decades, there is increasing competition in the marketplace for the arts/leisure /lifestyle market. Relatively speaking, for many of you, especially that sort of 60-40 small mid-size in today's group of listeners, then the growth potential of sponsorship dollars for you is significant. Okay, next slide. We've taken a look at the why, now take a look at the who. This is not a simple thing, although the slide would have you believe that it is. There are at least two sides to this conversation. One is the board side, and the other is the staff side. As I go through, I know on slide number 13, I'm going to come back to some more ideas. But what you really want to make sure is that the players on your team, the board and the staff, understand who they are, what their role is, and how to approach it. Again, next slide, please. Thank you very much. Okay, whereabouts to target. I had the opportunity decades ago to participate in some analysis study research that took a look at small and mid-sized arts organizations in the province of Ontario as to where the successes were coming from in terms of sponsorship. And coming out of that is this shopping list, these 6 sectors. Retail is always a good sector because of location. it's the businesses, you're both businesses in that community on the same metaphorical, metaphysical street. In that research decades ago, they discovered the example of the jeweler who had closed down his shop in a major city, Toronto, and moved off to Peterborough. It was as much a lifestyle decision for he and his wife. They both liked classical music, chamber music, and there was a chamber music opportunity in Peterborough. So they went to the first concert, and as he stood there in the lobby during the intermission, one of the things that he recognized was the people standing around him were his customers. I mean, those were the kinds of people that he wanted to get. So he, the next day, phoned up the management of the chamber music concert series and said, I'd like to work with you. And I think what I'd like to do with you is to host a reception at the end of the concert. Stop and think about that for a moment. What he really said was, I want to be in the same room as what are the demographics and the finances, etc., of a chamber music audience, as I want them to know about me, the jeweler. So again, that was an intelligent way for him to know and understand. Okay, the second category is lifestyle, hospitality, leisure, travel. That makes total sense, again, given who our audience is. The third is business, personal, and professional services, lawyers, doctors, dentists, accountants, investment managers, insurance, et cetera, et cetera. The fourth one is real estate and development. We're in the same business that they are. We do community development. They do hardware, we do software. The fifth category is media communications. That's gotten much more complicated, much more sophisticated over the last 10, 20, 30 years. When I was much younger and we said social media, it had a very different meaning. And finally, light manufacturing, or to be determined. So one of the things I want you and your groups to do is to use this as a framework, use this as a shopping list, because in effect, it should be very productive for you. Okay, Allison, can we go on to slide 11? Okay, here's the how. It's the sponsorship cycle. Take a look at that and you can see, oh, that's why they call it a cycle. You start at the top, you go to the bottom, you go back up to the top. I need metaphorically for you to understand that what that is recounting is a marathon, not a sprint, because it is that cycle. So if that's the case, then what should we be doing? What's the step-by-step? What are the categories? What are the boxes that we've got to tick in terms of our progress, our implementation? So next slide. Before we get there, I also need you, presenter trickery. Plan is a verb. Yes, you need to have a plan, but you also need to recognize is the moment you've got that plan down on that document, it's going to change, it's going to evolve. So be in a planning mode rather than, what did we used to call them? Strategic plans on the top shelf. Secondly, know yourself, know your target, know your market, research, research, research. Third is I'm assuming that you understand that sponsorship is not a one-size-fits-all. Sponsorship is something that's going to be tailored. So you need to be looking at what it is that you do, i.e. your sponsorship opportunities, as a ladder of opportunities. Quite frequently I see draft sponsorship proposals from small, mid-sized, and there it is. It's the grid. All the way from the, gold, silver, bronze, maybe platinum or diamond up above that, et cetera, et cetera. And that generic grid is in your sponsorship package. And all too often you go in because you think so-and-so is a $2,000 potential, and they're going to take a look at the difference between the 2,000 and the 1,000 and see it's not that different. So he's going to say, I'm not a 2, I'm a 1. So yes, You need to, in doing your homework and your preparation, prepare that grid, but please do not put it into your promotional material. Do not send it out to the potential sponsors. Square pegs fit in square holes, round pegs in round holes. You know, you got to be nimble, you got to be responsive, you got to be reactive, et cetera, et cetera. And finally, it's assumed that you have systems for support, that you've got some kind of database management capacity so that you're able to capture name, address, telephone number, time you called, what the message was. I mean, literally, you know, the value of a database is tied to how well you keep up the database as a way to help you. So if you haven't got one, then you got to sit down and start thinking your way through that. I say database, not an Excel grid, because the really valuable thing about a database is that you can search through it by variable. Whereas yes, on a grid like an Excel spreadsheet, you can add up and down and across, et cetera, but it doesn't give you the flexibility of saying, you know, winter season and finding out where your best opportunities are. So that's all background. Let's take a look at step number one. Next slide, please. And I'm having a honey tea break. Okay. The board has to buy in. The board has to own the sponsorship strategy, because if the board's not behind it, it's not going to happen. That doesn't mean the board has to do it. That doesn't mean the board should be the only ones doing it, but the board has to take a look at a strategic opportunity by your organization and say sponsorship needs to be, will be part of our strategic development. Secondly, remember the learning curve, or for those of you from the marketing background, product lifecycle. They're both the same thing. It's essential. It will probably, now again, about 59% of you said that you were in small organizations. About 39% of you said you were in mid-sized. So that's anywhere between 1 and maybe 5 or 6 staffing positions, maybe a little bit of extra contract work, depending upon whereabouts in the season that you are. It has to be the staff and the board working collaboratively. And I'm going to spend a little moment here. You often hear the phrase working board or policy board. I know from my experience and research that I've followed that we lose approximately 50% of our board recruits before they get to the end of our first term. And since many organizations have that unenviable habit of closing down the board at the end of the year and starting fresh, even though it's the same people. So if you only have a 1-year term, that's a real challenge. So on average, 50% of your new recruits don't even get to the end of their first term. And when the research asked them why, it was some version of not that we lied to them, but we are far more complex and sophisticated than they imagined. And so to parachute from outside onto a board table without any background history, the learning curve is vertical, and half of the people who have that experience say, this is not for me at this particular time. So the better strategy I would suggest to you is, for those of you who have a favored professional sports franchise, the key to their success has been their farm team system. Those of us who live in Toronto and are aspirational Toronto Leaf fans, one of the things that we recognize is that the future of that club is going to depend upon what the Marlies do, what the farm team does. And for me, the farm team is your committee system. So an overall insight for me at this particular point is stop parachuting people onto your board and losing half of them before they figure it out, but rather recruit people into the committees. Whether it's a working board or a policy board, it doesn't really matter. Committees, by their definition, are working. So if you bring people into a committee and in effect they have 6 months, a year, 2 years to discover metaphorically where the washrooms are, and then you have a vacancy on your board, then you fly them up to the board. No matter whether you're talking about a board or a committee member, especially if you're talking rather about a board member, they have to understand, and as staff, you are best positioned to help them understand that in effect, good board members have a split personality, or metaphorically, they need to recognize they wear 3 hats. When a board member sits at a board table at a board meeting and has a policy discussion, that's 1 hat. But when a board member sits on a sponsorship committee with staff and other volunteers, everybody at that level is a peer. It's committees are made up of equals, whether it's board, staff, volunteers, etc. And then the third hat that all board members need to recognize is what my loving wife calls the voluntold. I know you're the president of the board, Jerry, but the house opens in 5 minutes. Get that broom and sweep the stage. And I say, yes, I understand. That's part of my job. Okay, let's take a look at slide 2, or the next slide, if we could, Allison. Inventory. There's so much thinking, research that you should be doing before you go out and make that first pitch. You don't want to be the organization from the artsvest program that sends out your first proposal to a company that starts off, "Dear Sir / Madam, we think we're a wonderful fit for you and your company." That's the case, then why is it just "Dear Sir / Madam"? No, you got to do your homework. So first, the internal homework, taking a look at yourselves. You have to understand your programming mix. Probably for most of you, your season starts in the fall. Your financial year may not. It may be tied to the calendar year, or may be tied to a March or April. But again, you need to understand that structure. Here's a little piece of homework for you, board, volunteers, staff, committee, to do. Sit down, large room, blank wall. Take a piece of masking tape and go from the left corner over to the right corner, and then using Post-its, write a small Post-it for everything that you do, whether it's an event, a season, whether it's a program, a show, a performance, a series, whether it's an exhibition, it doesn't matter what it is. And on the left is the beginning of your year. Again, that depends upon whether you're calendar or fiscal or program, etc. But you start on the left side and you go across that wall to the other side with all of the things that you do. And in effect, that's your inventory. You got to know and understand your audience. You have to be able to explain, to articulate to a potential sponsor, here's where the fit comes. Again, an organization that I was working with at the moment recently it's a visual arts center in the community, has 500 members. Those are individuals who pay $115 a year to belong. They have 24,000 people who come and visit this center over the year. And you need to be able to explain, to articulate to a potential sponsor that, for example, for this organization, the majority of their membership are retired, over 65, senior women. Whereas when you take a look at the 24,000 or the 2,000 a month, the audiences, the supporters, they're far more sophisticated, far more diverse than that. Just that little note at the bottom where it says excess capacity is our greatest asset. Nobody gives money to strangers, with the possible exception of panhandling, and that's not what sponsorship is about. So you got to have, metaphorically or metaphysically, unused capacity. If you're in a performing arts presenting business, then you got empty seats. And you know, and I know that choristers and musicians and actors and dancers prefer a full house. There's nothing more heartbreaking than the echo of half a house. So any opportunity that you have of giving out those free tickets or inviting people to large scale events in your heritage or visual arts facility, all of those, anything you can do to get somebody to find out about you in the first instance is about establishing new friends. Okay, slide, next one, please, if I could, Allison. Okay, taking inventory external. We've spent the last 5 minutes talking about the stock, the inventory inside. We need to take a look at it from the outside. And that's where we have to say to ourselves, you know, what is our programming like? Do we have a single event? Are there multiple events? Are we a touring company? Do we bring shows, exhibits outside our own home market? Is there anything about what it is that we do that has a seasonality? You know, the Christmas season, the Easter concert, the et cetera, et cetera. When you're thinking about trying to establish relationship with potential sponsors, then the my place or their place becomes an important thing. I'm going to do a little bit of a sidebar here. Allison had already mentioned that there is a handout, and she will send it to you at the end of that. And on that handout, there will be, because Allison and Monica here in Toronto have said that they will find or update the URL for a report that Council for Business and the Arts did in partnership with the Ontario Arts Council about 3-4 years ago, Culture for Competitiveness. It was an interesting piece of research where they went out and talked to, here in the GTA, Greater Toronto area, they talked to 500 respondents who were small, mid-sized companies, largely in the knowledge sector, design, computers, product development, et cetera, et cetera. And they did a parallel survey interview with 500 employees, individuals who would work at or who might want to work at those kinds of companies. And one of the things that came out of that research is the opportunity for your gallery, for your theater, dance, music, concert, orchestra, for your heritage site, for all of you to, when you're talking to those information or knowledge economy organizations, one of the greatest pieces of surprise for me was the high level of interest and support for the arts that those 500 employees spoke about, as opposed to the employers who said that they thought that tickets to sports events would be important. They discovered that, yes, those millennials were equally, if not more so, interested in arts events, creative events, et cetera, et cetera. So there's also opportunities for employee engagement as well. So going on to the next slide. So far, you haven't knocked on anybody's door. All you've done is you've taken a look inside and outside. You now understand who you are. You now understand who's out there. You have a better, a more profound understanding of what might work. So targeting and research. Okay, if you do nothing else, start a list that has those 6 sectors on it: retail, lifestyle, business, professional, et cetera, et cetera. One of the most challenging things about sponsorship is the cold call. Nobody likes to, you know, send a dear sir, madam, or okay, I've gone to their website, or I've heard from somebody that the owner manager is actually called Jerry Smith. So I've been able to address my proposal. Um, what you really want to do is to get somebody to bring you to the meeting. You want somebody who knows somebody. So you go to your board members, you go to your committee members, you go to your staff members, you go to previous and other sponsors, and you say, who do you think we would be a good fit for? And so there's your database. You're beginning to build a list. So Jerry Smith, who sits on your board, has said that he has a fairly good relationship with a major hotel chain. Okay, we got a silent auction coming up. So, there's a sponsorship opportunity right there. So you get all of those individuals to submit. And one of the cheapest, easiest, simplest things that I do with any boards that I work with is I give them a sheet. There's your name. Who do you know? What do you think would be the fit? And give it to me. We'll collect it. So when it comes time to targeting, you're no longer doing a cold call. You've got your board member, staff member, former sponsor, donor, champion, etc., who can contact their colleague in the hotel business and say, hey, I sit on the board committee, I'm a subscriber, I'm a member of such, and they do some amazing stuff. They really contribute to this community. And I'd like to bring them to you because I think they have an idea you might be interested in. So there goes the cold call. You've got an introduction now. Somebody's brought you to the door. As I'll say in a moment, you want to bring them along. You don't need them to make the pitch. You, the sponsorship team, can do that. But just think of the amount of ease there would be if Jerry brings you into the office and says, here, I'd like you to meet chair of the sponsorship committee or the executive director, general manager of company XYZ, and they have a story to tell you. So that targeting research is essential. One of the best for me, for those of you who know Metro Toronto at all, is I always pick up a copy of the local Snapped newspaper. Because if you want to talk about lifestyle advertising, they're all in there. And what are they doing? They're going out to community events and snapping happy snappies, putting it into that magazine, and everybody gets a chance to look at themselves and each other. But you and I get to take a look at, hey, who are the advertisers in Snapped Etobicoke, for example? In your research, you want to make sure that you got a balance of the 6 sectors, retail, lifestyle, et cetera, et cetera. You also want to, I spoke to it earlier, what I call metaphorically is the ladder of opportunities. Your thinking, your planning has said that you need to talk about, whatever the equivalent is of, platinum, gold, silver, bronze, et cetera, but you're going to keep that inside. What you know is you've got to have the bottom, depending upon the size of your organization, et cetera, et cetera. There's going to be the $50 to $100 business card size ad in your program or on the wall or whatever it happens to be. And that's for, representation at such and such an event, as opposed to, hey, for $500, you become a sponsor for the entire run of that show or that exhibition, whereas for $1,000. So in other words, literally, if you get people coming in at the $50 and $100, you know that there's an opportunity, a strategic opportunity for you to move them up the ladder. So no surprises. Homework is the key to success. Do it. All right, Allison, once more. Okay, opportunities. Again, in that exercise, if you remember going back to the wall with the tape from the left to the right, the passage of time, that's a year, and the Post-its, whether it's projects or programs, seasons or events, person or role, outreach, and it doesn't really matter what the product is, what the proposal opportunity is. You've got that kind of richness, that kind of detail. Again, next slide. Okay. Here's one of the things nobody can tell you. how much? How much should I charge for? Um, there is a link there. If you take a look at that, and that'll bring you to a company in Canada that's been doing sponsorship research across the sector for over a decade. And there is some good research background there. But basically, it's not a science, it's an art. As you look around your community, as you talk to your friends with other companies, other facilities, et cetera, it's all about research. One of the things that, for me, the optimal sponsorship relationship building is an opportunity to sit down across the table from a potential sponsor and to tell them who we are, what the opportunity is, and then to hear from them what they think they're interested in. Then you go away and you craft the proposal. So everything is open to negotiation. Here's a question I often get asked. Can you sell the same thing more than once? Yes, you can, but not to the same person, not to the same sector. So that if you've got a $250 sponsorship and you've got a local restaurant or a caterer, then you don't go to a second caterer, but rather you go to a retailer, or you go to an investment advisor, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, you can sell the same thing more than once, but not to the same sector. Okay, let's move on to the next one, if we could, please, Allison. And again, I'm going to take another sip here. Oh, that's good. All right, do your homework. No surprises. You don't want to be the one who sends out that, "Dear sir, madam, I think we're a good fit," because that's just plainly embarrassing. The proposal, what's in it? It's going to be about media. It's going to be about exclusivity of their brand, reception and guest, all of those benefits that you have joined in the artsvest program, because they're going to take you down that highway. So I'm not going to spend a lot of time here today, but I am going to talk about a little bit about the proposal and the pitch. First of all, when it comes to the proposal, I'm going to suggest to you that you think of it like a tiered cake, whether it's a birthday cake, an anniversary cake, et cetera, et cetera. But the top layer of that cake is the ask. I have seen sponsorship proposals where they're beautiful and they sing a magnificent song, but nowhere, let alone at the top, does anybody say, "And we value this sponsorship at $750." So my advice to you is start your proposal letter with, "We value this sponsorship at $500, $5,000, whatever it happens to be." So that's the top layer. That's the ask. It's right up at the top. And then underneath that is the next layer, is where, in effect, you're saying to them what's in it for them. Because here's what smart business people will do. They've seen that request for $500. As they're reading through the benefits that you're proposing to go with that, they're doing a mental calculation. They're saying, if I spent the same amount of money in advertising, if I spend it in doing posters and flyers for distribution, et cetera, am I getting at least an equal, if not a better deal? So the ask up front, what's in it for them, is the second layer. And then the back layer, the bottom layer, is everything that you want them to know about you. You want to make sure that the proposal is, in fact, all about them and how you can respond to it, rather than saying, "We are the best game in town. By the way, you should help us." Okay, you got your connection. Your board member has said, "Yes, I will introduce you to company A." You've done some research. It's time to go and knock on the door and to make the pitch. So a couple of things to keep in mind. Do not travel alone. Not that you can't, but if you've got that opportunity that Jerry, your board member, has made this connection, Jerry has said, "I can walk you in the room, you do the talking." That helps to address the nobody gives money to strangers. it's important. Um, because of the ladder of opportunity that I talked about metaphorically earlier, as you're listening to that individual, you're able to narrow down which rung of that ladder is going to be the starting point for them. You've never shown them the grid, so they don't know what the top is and what the bottom is, but you're listening to them. So don't travel alone, and 2 ears, one mouth. Okay, Allison, if we can go to the next one, and we're getting close to question and answer time, so I'm going to speed things up just a little bit so we've got time. Okay, congratulations. They said yes. What are you going to do next? Well, first, formalize it in a contract. One of those things to remember that a promise is only as good as the paper it's written on. You want to make sure that you outline point form what it is you said you're going to provide them at that price point, et cetera, et cetera. If in fact they've said no, then you want to listen critically, listen carefully as to what it is they're saying no to. Are they saying no to this proposal because, for example, they do their marketing budget planning on a calendar year? They're coming up to December and there's not that much money left in the budget, kind of thing. So no, I'm going to have to say no at this time. And their brain is mentally saying, gee, I wish you guys had come to me last February when I was doing this. I could have built it into the budget. So you got to explore what it is that they're having problems with. If in fact it's a hard no, if they've said, this doesn't really work for us, I think often what that is code for saying nobody gives money to a stranger. So if you're a presenting series, performing arts, visual, music, dance, theater, etc., and you're not in a sellout position, and if you are in a sellout position, don't let us all know because we'll just be heartbroken. That's where the excess inventory of invitations to those performances or invitations to those exhibitions or to those showcases is something for you to invite people to. Please come. Jerry, I understand that this is not a good fit for you this time and that I will come back to you again in February with a revised proposal. But in the meantime, here are tickets for you and your family or you and staff members to come to such and such a performance. Please be our guest. And they'll be gracious and they say, oh, thank you very much. Yes, I'll take 4 of those. And you say, fabulous. I'll have them delivered, mailed, digitized, et cetera, et cetera. And then on that evening when you have invited them, you and or one of your colleagues are there at the door taking a look. And when they see that the potential shows up, then you can welcome them. You can give them that psychic hug and make them feel like they're part and parcel of the family. If they didn't show up, then that's data, that's information. So, you can follow it up kind of thing. Okay, Allison, let's go to the next one. We're getting there. Managing good relationships. So we've gone through the cycle. We've gotten that sponsorship. We've given them the contract. Now, what do I do next? And this is why I referred at the beginning of this as it being a marathon, not a sprint. Communications is at the heart of all good relationship management. So it's got to be timely, it's got to be often, and it's got to be personal. If you, to the degree that you can, there should be a single individual responsible for the stewardship for the reporting and recording side, just so that it doesn't slip off the table, kind of thing. Yes, you got to have a contract. That's one of the things that the ArtsVest program will give you access to. You want to make sure that expectations have been met and that stewardship. And stewardship is that big magic word. I'm not going to try and define it today because that's why you're part and parcel of the ArtsVest program, because it's all about stewardship. So there's that. And penultimately, Allison, the last slide. is you've been successful, you've gone through the cycle, you're back to the top of the timeline again. Renewals are as easy as A, B, C, D. A, assume each sponsor wants first right of refusal. That becomes an element that you put in your contract. When should you begin? Now. The sponsor was at the exhibition last week. Here's an opportunity for you to follow up. It's part of your stewardship, et cetera, et cetera. So you give them a call, you send them an email, you make sure that they're being listened to. In this process, and part of what you will begin to explore through the stewardship cycle is how best to cultivate, how best to keep them coming back, and if the top sponsorship level for you for your season is $2,500, I guarantee you no company, no sponsor is going to say, and we'll do that until all of us are dead. Somewhere along the line, you need to recognize that company that you is going to say, hey, it's been really good, but 2 years from now, we're going to be looking at other opportunities. And you say, oh, that's all right. I have this ladder of opportunity, and I have these people on the lower rungs who would love to take your space. Yay. So cultivate and finally deliver. So that's what I think about what you need to be paying attention to in terms of sponsorship, presumptions, et cetera, et cetera. Yes, taking a look at the next slide, there is the handout, and Allison will make sure that you get it. And Allison, we're at that point now, I think, that if you have some specific questions that I could attempt to address, I would be glad to.
Oh, thank you so much, Jerry. Oh my goodness, that was such great information. We've got a fantastic queue of questions going here, so right. I'll start reading. Are you aware of any cases where multiple organizations put together a joint sponsorship bid? So example, a museum and a theater or a philharmonic orchestra going as a group to a potential sponsor?
I cannot recall a specific, but I don't see any reason not to. One of the things that I often counsel clients is that we need to see what it is that we're doing as growing the market. You're not really trying to take away market share from somebody else. So whether you got 5% of a butter tart is not the same thing as 5% of a butter pecan pie. So working collaboratively with other arts organizations, I see nothing wrong with that. If you manage that relationship responsibly, that's where 1 and 1 becomes 11. Does that make sense?
Yes. I'm now hungry though, because it's lunchtime over here.
It's a shame you're not in Toronto. My wife has made 2 bourbon-based butter pecan pies for an auction tonight.
Okay, focus. I'm not hungry. So our next question is seeking sponsorship advice for Indigenous projects like Otopiaki, which is an Alberta-based Indigenous Fashion Week. Yep. So they're wondering, is organizations who seek sponsorship of a project as a bit of a shortcut to the TRC calls to action or Indigenous relations? Ethically, we can't be at odds with our organizational goals and our key stakeholder values who care about relational accountability, the relationship of the business to, for example, the land or the communities. But their other tension is that therefore we should approach Indigenous businesses, but we find this sector overburdened. Is this common with other Indigenous arts organizations? And do you have any practices in this context that you might be able to speak about?
Yeah, I think one of those things that all of us, whether or not we're traditional, whether or not we're Indigenous, whether or not we're commercial, whether or not we're community-based and we're into community development, etc., the old description of marketing in 5 words, different strokes for different folks, or product differentiation for market segmentation. It is more complex, more sophisticated, more demanding today in Canada in Indigenous-based organizations, companies reaching out into the commercial or the industrial market, seeking investment in what it is that they do. But in the same way as, for example, any company, for example, a children's theater company or a youth choir, et cetera, you always have to make sure that the people you're approaching are people who are going to recognize and respect the mission of your organization. So that's why, for example, a kids programming museum would not be going to the local distillery for sponsorship investment. By the same token, given the increased acknowledgement and recognition of failures in the past, and a definite increase in trying to build bridges in the contemporary, in today's marketplace, certainly speaks to potential for Indigenous companies to reach out to their community. And again, community, we use that word 100 times a day, but reach out to their geographic community, reach out to, for example, other faith communities. So yeah, it's challenging in a different way, but there's no reason why an Innu or Inuit or Indigenous heritage site or art gallery, etc., shouldn't reach out to its communities of interest and seek partnership. Square pegs fit square holes, round pegs fit round holes. Does that help?
I think so. If there's an additional question, please just type it into the Q&A and we'll do a follow-up on that one. Thank you so much. Thanks, Jerry, and thanks, Patty. Okay. Question, can you touch on expertise as one of the 3 kinds of sponsorships? Is there a way to give this a value? Is a paper trail needed?
Simple question, not a simple answer. First of all, anything you don't have to pay for is valuable for you. So that, for example, you could turn to a local business accounting firm and seek an in-kind contribution from them of services. You might, in fact, turn to local service clubs like the JCs or the Rotary, etc., looking for opportunities to build bridges, make connections between individuals in that community with expertise. If, in fact, a business is going to make a contribution of, I have a communications expert, I have a marketing expert, I have a digital promotion expert, that yes, I could contribute to your board and or your committee, and I would like to treat that as a sponsorship. Well, that's where artsvest, as you go through this program, is going to help you learn to articulate how do I price that, how do I recognize the value of that, and how do I, in fact, create a paper trail of an exchange of checks, so that the contribution of expertise from that social media company is received by the organization and recognized, able to be recognized by artsvest. Does that make sense?
Yes. Thank you, Jerry.
Okay.
Fantastic. I've got a couple questions here that are asking for database software recommendations.
Oh, God.
You can decline if you'd like to, Jerry.
Well, no, it's just that at this moment, to the best of my knowledge, working here out of the Greater Toronto area, it's gotten more complex. Up until recently, one of the recognized database companies was Sumac. Sumac was an original founder owner who came from the sector, and he just wanted to get back and make it work. He since sold the company to Amazon, and all of a sudden that monthly subscription of 5 cents has become $5 and starting tomorrow or fairly soon. So at this particular point, I no longer feel comfortable suggesting sumac, although if there's enough pushback here in the Canadian marketplace from small, mid-sized organizations, then maybe Amazon might learn a lesson. Salesforce is another one that I've heard of, but Salesforce actually started out as a industrial commercial product, and it's so big and so sophisticated that it's overwhelming for many of the 59% small and 39% mid-sized organizations. So what's the broker in Canada called something tech? Yeah, I'm drawing a blank on it, but it is an organization that in effect discounts or wholesales or brokers discount and wholesale software packages to not-for-profit charities.
Perfect. Okay.
Technology is not my skill.
More questions? No, we've got so many. This is great. This is a question regarding targeting service clubs. Are you suggesting that as an arts organization could approach the Calgary Chamber of Commerce that they are members of, and let them know they're looking for a sponsor and ask them who they think would be a good fit?
Simple answer, yes. But you're not going to put that notice on their website. You're not going to go to the regular meeting and stand up and say, we're looking for such and such. That's where whoever your figurehead is that goes to those meetings, if you are a member of the Chamber of Commerce, of the JCs, but that's where through the networking activity, as you're having a coffee after the meal or sitting down at a table with 6, 7, 8 other individuals from a variety of business backgrounds, and they know you're from a not-for-profit possible charity in the visual heritage performing arts in your community, that's where you network, and that's where you get, that's through the relationship building that you will, somebody will say, well, you know, if you gave so-and-so a call, tell them I said that you should, or I will call so-and-so, here's their name and number, call them within the week. Don't call them until after Thursday, because I will give them a call or I'll send them a heads up, et cetera, et cetera. So it goes back to nobody gives money to strangers. Anything you can do to establish a bridge is a step in the right direction. And if that bridge happens to be the local service club, then by all means use it.
That's great advice. Next question. There's so many, Jerry. Have a tea break.
Thank you. I wish I were being paid by the question.
This is great. Marilyn's asking, we tried doing an email survey of our fan base to help us define our audience demographics, and they got a very low response rate. Are there any other effective ways to gather that kind of a data?
Well, yes. At least in your database of your membership, subscribers, supporters, donors, whatever, at least one of the things that you want to capture is the postal code. And you can then go to the post office website and you can find a demographic profile of those postal codes. So that, for example, one organization I was working with, again, community-based, they did research that said X percentage of their members came from M8W, M86, M8, et cetera, and by going to the post office, they got a profile there. Here in Toronto, one of the resources available to any organization is the opportunity to go to toronto.ca and to take a look at the socio-demographic profile of their neighborhood of their part of the city. And again, what you're at least getting is a profile so that when, for example, if you go to, using an example that I'm more familiar with, here in Toronto, if I went to a local business and said, 60% of our members come from the Toronto side of the board and 40% come from the Mississauga side of the board because we happen to be right on the border, then both the Toronto and the Mississauga businesses know their neighborhoods. And if they say, okay, their membership profile is senior retired women, and 60% of them are over here in Toronto, or 40% of them are over here in Mississauga. Oh yeah, that's my kind of people. So that's what I would suggest. Sometimes if you have access to, in your neighborhood, in your region, friends who are in the real estate business, then real estate agents, real estate brokers have access to some amazingly detailed socio-demographic profiles of neighborhoods. So again, if you've at least got the forward postal sorting area of your members, donors, supporters, subscribers, etc., and your cousin, brother, third husband is a real estate broker, then you can in fact begin to match those two up so that you're able to speak knowledgeably to a potential sponsor that yes, in this neighborhood, the majority of the residents are in single family homes, 30% of them are in condominiums or apartment buildings, et cetera, et cetera. So yes, there are ways of fleshing that out.
Thank you, Jerry. Actually, I haven't heard that before, and that's really great advice because there's so many realtors around. So it's a great excuse to have a realtor on your board or to connect with a realtor.
Well, okay, but also, the board is not the only table that you need to be recruiting for. Your sponsorship committee, your outreach committee, your development committee. Instead of parachuting people onto, you want to recruit in and fly them up.
Definitely.
That was slide 13, I think.
Okay, next question.
Yeah.
What's your experience dealing with larger corporate sponsors, banks and institutions? They've tried it in the past, but received a standard reply in negative.
Yeah. What are the major corporations, i.e. the big banks and the Sun Lifes and the et cetera, trying to tell us they're not interested in us because we are small and mid-size. Now, if you happen to be located in London, Ontario, for example, and there are major insurance companies' head offices located there, or if you're in Montreal and the same kind of thing happens, then yes, it does make sense for you to make that connection with the head office because you're in the same geographic area. But for the most part, you put your proposal together for $500 and you take it to your local branch. You say to the manager or the accounts manager, we've been your client for the last 25 years. The full $200,000 of our budget goes through your bank, et cetera, et cetera. We've been a partner for a long time. Bank manager, account manager is probably going to say to you, you know what, well, my spending limit is $250, but I could take it upstairs to the regional because at 500, that's where we got to go. But if you're trying to think that you from the children's heritage site or the youth choir or the steel band, that you can put a proposal together for the Royal Bank or for the TD, because they are talking about some of the things that you're talking about, for example, leadership development. No, the national brands are looking for national profile. So don't set yourself up for heartbreak by starting your hunt with the national brands of the finance industry.
That's great advice. Next question. Do you believe that sector exclusivity is important to potential investors at every level of sponsorship?
Oh, how do you unpack that question?
We got lots of questions today.
Yeah. Okay. I don't know. Um, Sector exclusivity. I'm not quite sure if the questioner is saying, should we be looking for potential sponsors who have demonstrated through previous profile that they're interested in the arts, or they're interested in youth and families, or they're interested in et cetera, et cetera. I'm sorry, I'm really finding that question is so dense that I'm not able to answer it.
Maybe, Catherine, if you're still online, if you can do a follow-up question, then we'll come back to that one. That'd be great.
Okay. Excellent. Thank you very much, Allison.
So the next question is, I'm confused about not securing more than one sponsor in a sector. When I look at sponsorships from other organizations, it seems like there's often multiple restaurants or financial institutions, for example.
Yeah, one of the differences you'll find there is that one of those restaurants is at the $25 business card size. Another one of those restaurants is at the event promotion level, and one of those is at the season sponsor kind of thing. One of them is a family restaurant. One of them is a major branded franchised, et cetera, and the big one is actually a dining hall or a convention hall kind of thing. So no, you don't want to go to two mom and pop shops on the same block and say, have we got a deal for you? But you do have to make sure that you are discriminating, differentiating between if in fact you're going to go to more than one, for example, restaurant.
That's great. And Catherine just replied that that's exactly the question she was trying to ask. So,
okay.
2 in 1.
All right. Oh, good for us. Thank you, Catherine.
Oh, that's great. Question, do you have an arts advisory board? And if so, how is it structured?
Again, that's one of those really packed questions. By saying that you have an arts board, that means it's a constituted board of directors, and so they are the individuals that are elected by the membership and are held accountable by the membership, by the funders, et cetera, et cetera. When you say you have an arts advisory board, that changes the game. For example, I once had the honor of serving as the president of an advisory board for the assembly hall in Etobicoke. It was a facility owned and managed by the city, and so therefore we were only an advisory board. They had to listen to us. They didn't have to do what we told them, as opposed to being in fact a fully activated or incorporated board. So that was one half of it. Can I have the question again, because I distracted myself?
Oh, for sure. Do you have an arts advisory board? If so, how is it structured?
Okay.
And purpose?
Yeah. Okay. Here, Allison. Here's how I'm reading that particular question. We have a group of individuals who come from an arts background who offer us input and insight on the programming side. They may or may not be the board of directors. They may be the equivalent of a committee, of an advisory committee. And they could certainly help you with understanding, with their knowledge of the community, what might be a good fit between your programming and the business community there. Again, it's did I unpack that one right?
I believe so. If there's any follow-up, feel free, Patricia, to pop us a note. And the one other question is, what is the percentage of in-kind and percentage of expertise?
Well, the in-kind and the expertise are going to be much smaller than virtually anything else, because what each of you recognized when you went through the application, the vetting process, to become part of the artsvest program, was that in trying to establish the level, your target to match, to meet or exceed from artsvest. Cash is definitely more valuable. Allison, you and Monica could answer this question better as to what the ratio is of, for example, if I get a brand new sponsor for $1, that'll be matched by $1 from artsvest. If I get a sponsor from last year to renew, it'll be renewed for 75 cents. If I get somebody who's going to give me, for example, worked with an organization recently that is making a pitch to IKEA for furniture, then a contribution of in-kind is only worth 50 cents. So as I say, Allison, I think the idea, as I explained it, is right. I don't know if the dollars and cents are.
Oh, that's great. Fantastic. And then one follow-up question to the Arts Advisory Board was, if you have one, how often do they meet?
As often as you need them. If in fact Arts Advisory Board, and see that phrase for me is where the confusion is coming from. If they're a group of individuals that you want to hear from because they are champions of participants in the art form, then that's closer to a mission kind of conversation in building your season and your approach. But if you've got an arts advisory board, are you going to engage them in the sponsorship process? If it's a group of individuals who have knowledge and expertise and profile in the community, are sharing their wisdom with you, then annually at least, if not perhaps no more than quarterly. But if you're really talking about a group of individuals who are going to play an integral part in your sponsorship development strategy, then at least on a quarterly, if not on a monthly basis, because I mean, that's what that sponsorship cycle is about.
Last one.
Okay, last question coming up.
That was it.
Oh, that was? Oh,
Yeah.
okay.
Congratulations.
Thank you very much, Allison. Thank you to you and Monica here in Toronto. And thank you very much to the 100 plus across Canada.
Thank you so much, everyone who's here. I'm going to just very quickly pull up a post-webinar poll before you guys log off your computers. If you want to be able to quickly let us know how this webinar was for you, that's super helpful for our own programming. And thank you so much, Jerry. It was just such an absolute joy to have you share all your expertise today. It really means a lot. So on behalf of the 115 people online, we had 141 at our peak.
All right.
Thank you so much for your time.
My pleasure. Look forward to it. You take care.
Take care. Thanks for filling out the poll, everybody. Wishing you all a wonderful week.